Hi, we're Green Week Circular Economy with Dr. Ismail, who is the ambassador of the Eastern Caribbean states. And Dr. Ismail spoke last night about the vulnerability of the islands. Can you tell us what you spoke about and what is there to do to help the islands?
Okay. Well, last night was a very special session for us because we're leading up to a global summit later this year in Samoa, where the focus is going to be on small island developing states and their special and unique circumstances and their vulnerabilities. So last evening, we spoke about a focus on the green economy for small island developing states so that they can have economies that are much more resilient and to be able to provide for the sustainable development and sustainable livelihoods of their people. It was a far-reaching conversation that involved discussions not only between SIDS. I was representing our 4 countries, which are the island of St. Lucia, Dominica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Kitts and Nevis. And in that context, we were talking about the challenges faced by small island developing states, such as ours. There is no secret that the last few years from 2008 have been very, very difficult one all over the world for countries which are also very, very large countries and rich countries. But nobody really fully understands the severe implications of the financial problems around the world and the consequential effect on small countries such as the 4 that I represent. The issue of vulnerability stands very much at the heart of any discussions about small island developing states. A fellow panelist last night was someone from Mauritius. Mauritius too is an island and spoke about their own vulnerabilities, but Mauritius has a population of 1.23 million people. The 4 countries that I represent have less than 400,000 people. We range in size from about 185,000 people in St. Lucia to about 55,000 people in the island of St. Kitts and Nevis. So we are really, really micro SIDS, not even just SIDS in the normal definition of what a small island developing state is. And it comes with tremendous challenges, of course. If you have a population of about 55,000 people, perhaps you have a labor force of about 25,000 people, and with this labor force you have to provide all of the services for modern economies. You have to police, you've got to police your borders, you've got to safeguard your people, you've got to provide education and health, you've got to provide the prospect for a good future for your people. But if you're that small, you have very little ability to diversify your economies or to bring money in. And what we have faced significantly over the last several years is the fact that because of the collapse of the integrated global financial markets, we have had less foreign exchange coming in. We call it foreign direct investment in tourism, in infrastructure, in capital projects such as roads, ports, airports, all of which you need for your economy to grow. We've also been having much less by way of revenues coming in from tourists because people are not spending money in the way they used to. So very little money is coming into the country, but we still have to spend money and service our debt. When countries are that small, the options which they have are very, very limited. So that if, for example, you're an agricultural country and you produce bananas, which is really for us the reality of part of our story, we produce bananas, and then because of international global trading arrangements, we lost our market for bananas because we could no longer compete because the world had globalized and there were new trading arrangements and rules.
So how are you tackling this problem?
By going from agriculture into tourism. So when you go into tourism and then the tourists don't come, again you have a big problem. When countries are small, it is very, very difficult for them to diversify their economic options because the threshold in the labor market is so small. Access to capital is very expensive, so that whereas here in Europe and in the United States, people can afford mortgages at 1%, at 2%, at 0% interest, our mortgage rates are still 8, not even 8, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14%, even in these days of real depressed capital. So vulnerability for small islands means that we're economically vulnerable. Socially, we are vulnerable as well because we have so few choices. There are big issues that face us. If you take a look or you think of a map of the Caribbean, we are that archipelago of islands between Puerto Rico all the way down to South America. We are that beautiful, beautiful set of islands. But we also are located between the world's biggest producers of drugs and the largest markets of drugs. So in the case of our islands, 2 of our islands, Martinique is north of the island of St. Lucia, which is one of ours, and Dominica is between Guadeloupe and Martinique. So when those drugs move from south through our very fragile countries, when they leave our waters and get to Martinique, they are in Europe. When they leave across Martinique, Dominica, and get to Guadeloupe, you're back in Europe as well. And so what happens in our part of the world is very important as well, for security and other reasons, to Europe. But there are other aspects of vulnerability. We get hit, regularly by tropical cyclones, and you know what these are like. There was a super typhoon that hit late last year in Indonesia and the Philippines, and we all know the sheer horror of the destruction which took place. We had many hurricanes in our part of the world. A very notable one was Hurricane Ivan, which hit the island of Grenada, and in 20 hours, Hurricane Ivan cost Grenada 2 years' worth of GDP, from which it is still trying to recover. So even though we may appear to be romantic islands, well-off islands, we are very, very vulnerable because we have no cushion. So when tourists don't come, we suffer. When we get hit by a hurricane, we suffer. When climate change causes a rise in sea level and more extreme weather events, we suffer. And perhaps one of the finest examples of vulnerability from natural hazards, perhaps is the island of Montserrat, very much in the Eastern Caribbean grouping, a country very, very dear to my heart. I certainly don't represent Montserrat. I need to be clear to say this, because Montserrat, of course, is not an independent country and is not part of our mission. But in a previous capacity, I had the opportunity to visit Montserrat quite often and develop very close relations with people in that country. And Montserrat, very, very beautiful island, of course, part of the volcanic chain of the Eastern Caribbean, a volcano which we were told was not just asleep, but extinct, I believe, and I could be wrong about that. But one day it blew up and changed the lives of the people of Montserrat completely. They moved from having a population of about 10, 11,000 people to less than 2,000 people. Their town, in which they had just built a brand new library, a brand new courthouse, a brand new hospital, was buried under lava and ash before the first book could be taken, before the first hospital bed could be used. It was devastating. And one of the most sobering things for me was visiting the area that had been destroyed, the unsafe zone, which is, more than 1/3 of the island.
When did you visit?
Yes.
When?
The first time I visited was perhaps a year after the first volcanic eruption took place, a year and a half, probably, or closer to 2 years, because it was still very unsafe, and I had to be taken in specially and then taken back out. But it was eerie because as you approached the area of devastation, the bougainvillea was in bloom, but it was very quiet. There were no cats, no birds, no butterflies. And then you went across a mountain and you looked, and in front of you it looked like the face of the moon. And the people of Montserrat lost everything because they were still paying for mortgages, but they lost their homes. There was no compensation. It was very, very hard. But I must say that I have the utmost respect for the people of Montserrat, because through all adversity, they have shown incredible resilience as a people. Whilst others thought they should all leave their home, there are some who have refused to leave what has been their home and what will be their home forever. So instead, they started this slow process of rebuilding a new capital for themselves, new homes, new schools, a tiny new airport, a new port, and it's an incredible journey, but one that I feel so very proud to have seen firsthand, and know that these are island people who have shown the world how steely their resolve is, how resilient they can, but also the beauty of having friends and partnerships to have been able to support them through a very difficult time. So yes, small island developing states, very, 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 very vulnerable. And if there is any message I want to leave, is that it's so very important for us to have champions and advocates for our cause, and always to understand that yes, we look romantic, yes, we look beautiful, yes, we look like paradise, but behind that, the reality is not those things. The reality is that day to day there's a struggle to make ends meet.
Thank you.
You're welcome.